Welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast, where we talk about the human side of data. In other words, data, communication, and personal development. My name is Gilbert Eikelenboom. I'm driven by curiosity, and my aim is to spread insights that you can apply in your life starting today. So, let's do it. Let's start MindSpeaking. Emotions are pieces of data. Do you agree? I spoke about emotional intelligence quite a bit in my book, People Skills for Analytical Thinkers. And today I speak with Tom Zierold. Tom runs Equip, a coaching and training company, and he helps people unlock their emotional intelligence. If you think emotional intelligence is a vague, abstract concept, you're not alone. That's exactly what I thought as well. But Tom found a really concrete language with practical tips and examples to help you discover yourself and improve the way you collaborate with others. So, I hope you enjoy this episode about emotional intelligence, collecting pieces of data, and improving the collaboration and influencing others. Hey Tom, nice to see you again.
Hey Gilbert, good to see you as well.
Really good speaking to you. Many times we've spoken on the phone, we've exchanged ideas, we've talked about emotional intelligence, being self-aware, what type of questions you can ask yourself to discover yourself, to discover other people. We've had long conversations, and at some point I thought, why not have such a conversation and record it so other people might be able to benefit. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I already know a bit about you, but for the people who don't know so much about you, can you share something about yourself, where you grew up, and how you ended up starting your own company, Equip?
Yeah, of course. And just to say, I shared the enthusiasm you have for this conversation. I always come away having learned something from speaking with you. And I think the ideas we kind of co-create have been some real breakthroughs to the work I do as well. So yeah, it's great to be here speaking today. So a little bit about me. You asked where I grew up. So I'm from the UK. I'm from England. I grew up in a place called Brighton, which is on the south coast. So a lot of my childhood was spent either being on or in the water. So that's pretty much every childhood memory is tied up with being at the beach or on the sea. How that affects me as a person now, probably maybe there's a sort of slightly chilled vibe that I have, and I think that's just coastal living. I think a lot of people that spend time at the coast might be able to relate to that.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people on the coast tend to have a chill way of living? I got a really relaxed vibe with you always, so I can affirm that. And why do you think that is?
I think it's different for different people. For me, it was the closeness to being by the sea, being able to get down on the beach and just be stimulated by the kind of the natural environment. You could have, your brain could be going 1,000 miles an hour about day-to-day life, about work, about relationships, about whatever. But when you're kind of sat on the beach, hearing the wind, looking at the waves, it puts things into perspective a little bit. It does have a sort of a sense of clearing out some of the noise that maybe actually doesn't matter that much, but you don't stop because you're constantly surrounded by, people and things going on. Whereas the beach, you go down there early morning, you go down there at night, it can just be you, and it can just be you being in the moment. So I'm pretty sure that has something to do with it. And also, I think, some good bars and restaurants as well. So, people like to spend their time relaxing, maybe a slightly slower pace of life to some extent. So I think that's that kind of the mixture of that just has a slight, after time, has a bit of an impact on your kind of demeanor and the way you are with it.
I see what you mean there, and I didn't grow up close to the coast, but my mom did, so we always went there to every summer at least to go there for 1 or a few weeks. And when I was younger, I always saw the beach as a place where you go to when it's hot, right? Where it's warm, you go sunbathing, you go swimming. But more and more, I see the beach as a place to to relax, as a place of nature and a place to recharge. So when I go to the beach, even if it's cold, then I fully recharge and become more chill. So I totally see what you mean there.
How often do you get down to the beach now? Do you live close to it still?
I live in Amsterdam, capital of the Netherlands. It's about 45 minutes to the beach, so not too far. But lately, last year, I've been to the beach way more often. So maybe every few weeks, which is much more than the years before. So yeah. So I interjected in your introduction with the question. So please tell us more about who you are.
Yeah, of course. So I run a company called Equip, which is a coaching and training organization that focuses on helping people to really unlock and better access their emotional intelligence. And I've worked in the learning development space for the last 5-6 years now. It was actually during the pandemic, which of course we all went through, where I had the real catalyst, if you want, or that kind of incentive to start my own business. Which is odd in a way. You think of risky times to start a business, then during a period of uncertainty probably scores pretty high on that list. But there was a sense where I was just coming to the end of my coaching psychology qualification at Birkbeck University. So I already knew that I wanted to start doing something that was more my own. And because the world kind of slowed down, I thought, well, this is going to be the time that I can really invest into getting this up and running. And I also knew that, some of the associate work I was doing, there'd be less of that, as people kind of tightening their belts, if that phrase makes sense. And maybe even when I think about it beyond that, it was also, there was a sense where this would be a time where people would be doing a lot of reflection on the choices they had made up until that point, the fact that they were limited in what they could now do for, at the time, we didn't know how long, and the opportunity to start maybe working with people and being able to discuss their thoughts and feelings around their careers, around their lives. It would be a time where I felt like I could add value there, and I decided that it was the right thing to do. It was the right choice to make at that time. And I guess I wanted to be able to, and I wonder if this will make sense to you, like show up as myself. So I've worked for some great companies. I maintain really good relationships with a lot of the people that I used to work with. But I don't think you can help but be a little bit a representative of that company and adhere to certain kind of practices or ways of being. And I think that's good. But for me, this idea of wanting to really focus on what I was passionate about and have the autonomy to choose how I went about talking about that with people or working on that topic with people meant that it was important I did it for myself, and yeah. Did you find that similar?
I can totally resonate with that, and how I often saw it is when I was still employed working for Cognizant, for Capgemini. I really enjoyed the work and the opportunities that I got, and I'm really grateful for that. And at the same time, sometimes I felt like I needed to mold myself into a certain job description or certain responsibilities that were not completely close to me or what I wanted to do. So at some point, or for years, I have been thinking, all right, the only way to really write my own job description, to define my own responsibilities, to decide what I want to do and what I want to work on and why, that the only way is to start my own company, right? To work for yourself. So I can totally resonate with that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the conversations we've had. I think we've had different journeys, but we've had a similar kind of perhaps evolving mindset. I don't think we're.
I think a lot of people, you know, can resonate with the feeling of not knowing exactly what to do, right? Or maybe wanting to have a different career, changing careers, changing jobs, but not knowing exactly what belongs to you or what you really want to do. How did you, because you come across as a very self-aware person, but I'm sure you've done a lot of work to discover yourself, to find out what is really important to you. How did this process happen, and what helped you to learn and gain those insights?
Well, that's a big question. It's an important question. So let me try and answer that. So self-awareness is like, I guess, at the cornerstone of emotional intelligence. And again, it's a continual endeavor. Like some people, we may assume some people have just got it from day one. It's rarely the case. It's as much a learned behavior as an innate skill, which you've kind of just alluded to. Um, for me, I guess if I think back to how it was at school, then I was happy. Like I had a good childhood. I had friends. Was really into sports, but I was shy. Um, Kind of painfully shy, I would say. Like quiet. Um, and if I think back, you kind of throw puberty into the mix of that, a bit confused about where I kind of fitted in with life. And I was always kind of hesitant to kind of share my opinions. I always kind of wanted other people's validation. I wanted to know what other people thought before I kind of said what was on my mind. I think, that wanting to be liked and wanting to feel that um, I was like, I had something to say, I had something to offer. Um, and there's definitely, if I reflect on that, like internal issues that come if you kind of stay in that mindset. But at the same time, I think that kind of started me on the journey to really being curious about other people. It was like my way of understanding how to interact came from looking and observing and seeing how people made choices or their patterns of behavior were. And I think that's really, well, I didn't know at the time, that's that kind of level of empathy and wanting to kind of understand what makes people tick. It's kind of like led me on to where I am now and where I'm going in the future. In terms of me increasing my self-awareness, uh, so I look at it as self-awareness as two things. You have internal self-awareness, which is really how you see yourself, and external self-awareness, which is how other people see you. And to kind of cultivate a good level, you need both those things. And I think for me, especially, it was about having the confidence to find out what other people thought about me, not be scared about what their answers might be, understand what kind of things they saw in me or the potential they saw in me so that I could feel like, okay, I see how other people perceive me. Now I have a better understanding about how I can share what matters to me. And I don't think there was one moment that happened. I think it's you gain that confidence through the experiences that life throws at you when you're put into positions where you have to speak out, where you have to give an opinion, and then you have to accept someone challenging that opinion. Um, and that started really the beginning of my first job I had, probably. I worked in we have, you would probably know, like pubs in England, right? They're kind of different to bars on the continent. They're places where, you know, traditionally people would go there to have a drink, obviously, but really be vocal, really talk about things, really expect you to kind of engage with them and be part of their experience. I wasn't that kind of person, but working in that environment and, you know, having to kind of be part of those conversations allowed me to start hearing myself kind of share opinions, seeing how people responded to me, starting to kind of own who I was a bit more and starting to see what the qualities I brought into conversation and what the bits that I was kind of lacking in a little bit. Um, so yeah, the beginning, I guess the first job I had was, you know, was a big moment for me. And then university, then working in kind of commercial roles where it was always about people. It was always about having to understand other people and then having to understand me that would make the difference. Um,
Right, and sounds like that first job and being in a bar often helped you get out of your comfort zone and deal with people or an environment that expected something different from you, where you need to be more vocal and express your opinions and show yourself. And sounds like that pushed yourself to, yeah, show more of yourself, and that helped you discover more about yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was, and it's of, I was 18 at the time, and pretty much everyone was older than me. So you already feel that sense of trying to, impress your elders or kind of feel like you fit into an older group. You get acceptance from it. So to do that, there was a sense where you have to come out of your shell a little bit, if the phrase makes sense. Um, and then you start understanding how you fit into that. And I'm sure you have that when you're younger at school, but maybe you're not quite there yet. You're still kind of being in the same environment, and then suddenly you're put into a different environment, and you start really understanding how you behave.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I think it's also can be so valuable to live abroad in a different context, not just live far away from your family and friends, but also in a different culture where you're you might be the odd one out by definition, right? To understand, hey, how other people live their lives and how different or sometimes also similar it is. I think it's a really good experience. And you touched upon emotional intelligence a few times, and when I heard about emotional intelligence for the first time, and some other people might resonate with this, is that I found it a very abstract or vague term. What does it mean exactly? Emotional intelligence. How can emotions be intelligent, right? Because they only distract us. That's what I thought. But you speak about emotions being data. So can you tell us a bit more about that? What is emotional intelligence and how can it be data?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I think the point you made there is like a lot of people are now familiar with the term emotional intelligence, but it does sound a bit abstract. It doesn't always kind of line up with modern day thinking, perhaps. Or even if you like Google it, right, you can find probably 1,000 definitions to kind of try and establish what this means. So I try and keep it real simple. Emotional intelligence at its heart is about being able to tune into yourself and the ability to tune into others as well. And it's about looking at emotions as data rather than these kind of intangible, abstract things that we experience that we have no control over. And, you know, they kind of don't really matter because, it's our rational brain, it's our logic that should be in charge. Well, the point is that we experience emotions all of the time, right? They don't kind of live in boxes. I think quite often when I talk about emotion intelligence, people think, oh, this is about controlling really acute emotional experiences or understanding them. Like when someone has something that is really like high energy or a low level of unpleasantness or really low pleasantness. And, it could be anger or grief, or it could be, seeing someone get really upset about something. And that's fine because that is like the emotional expression of something we're experiencing, but it's only kind of the tip of the iceberg. Like at any one time, those emotions are kind of underlining how we think. So even during this conversation, right, like both of us will be having some kind of underlining emotional experience. So right now, I would say I feel at ease because I know you. We're talking about stuff that I'm interested in. I'm comfortable discussing. At least I feel comfortable discussing. So it's kind of like quite low energy, but a nice level of pleasantness. It will probably get, more lively. That emotion will change as maybe we uncover something new and interesting that we hadn't kind of explored before. Well, then it could shift. It could go into slight apprehension because maybe you ask a question. I'm like, geez, I'm not sure how to answer that. And then suddenly, so it's kind of high energy, but not so pleasant. And then if I, didn't answer it very well, I could get a bit sullen, which is like low energy, unpleasant because, oh man, I've screwed that up. So that emotion that we have can change all the time depending on the context of the situation. And I think it's impossible for us to like consistently be having to check in with ourselves about the emotion we're experiencing. But if we just think about the times where it's overwhelming, then we're missing out on this whole kind of raft of like information that's going on that we can actually pause and think, well, actually, because I'm feeling that, I'm going to behave in a slightly different way, or maybe I'll behave slightly differently now than I would then. And when we start doing that, we get much more understanding of ourselves and kind of what triggers those emotions within us. And then when we know how to do that, we can start doing it with other people as well. So I guess the data aspect comes from the fact that they're there. They're not something that, okay, we don't necessarily control them, but we can actually put a bit of focus on them to understand them, what they're telling us. And then it's our choice whether we choose to listen to them or ignore them, right? And different situations will call for different types of responses. Sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
really good to like act on our emotions. Sometimes it's really important that we don't suppress that emotion, but we might want to regulate it. We might want to just behave based on that emotion. So
And can you give an example of both of those situations when you might be willing to act on a certain emotion and when you want to take a different decision? Do you have any examples, maybe from the business context, doing a presentation or a meeting, or an example from your own life?
yeah, of course. So let's take a pretty like universal emotion, anger, right? And a lot of people see anger as fundamentally a bad thing. You know, it's a negative emotion, it's disruptive. And sure, it has the potential to do that. But if you look at something like anger as rocket fuel, right? If you channel that anger the right way, it can really propel you forward. And if you think about some of the times people in the history of the world or whatever have been angry, they've been motivated to do something about that, to fight injustice or to speak up when no one else was speaking up. So it's actually a really high energy emotion that we should experience and we should understand why we're experiencing it. The problem with anger is it's because it's like rocket fuel, it can also blow up in our face. And then it might blow up in other people's faces, and that's not so good. So when we don't acknowledge we're having the anger, or we're trying to suppress it and say we can't allow ourselves to get angry, we're not actually helping ourselves very much. We're not actually fully immersed in kind of what the experience is that we're going through. And if you can think about anger, you know, it means different things for different people, but we can get angry when we see someone in a meeting not listening to us. We can get angry when we're doing a presentation at ourselves because we've just missed the whole kind of really good anecdote that we were going to say. And it can kind of be like disruptive and like distracting. But then the important thing is we reflect on what that anger is telling us and whether we should do something about it. Now, if in the middle of a presentation and I've missed a whole slide, shall I start berating myself in front of an audience? Probably not. But it's okay to acknowledge the fact that I've missed that out because I can learn from that next time. If I'm in a meeting and someone's ignoring me, I can get angry and not say anything about it, just let it boil up. Or I could get angry at that person immediately. Both those things aren't going to help. But if I'm aware of the fact I'm angry about it, I can then have a choice to do something about it. So I can say, rather than continually assume this person isn't interested in what I'm saying, I can say to that person, "Hey, is there something on your mind? Did you something you wanted to contribute? I'm just aware that you haven't kind of engaged any of the material." So we can kind of channel it appropriately. I think it's always the key thing is about we have that ability to self-manage our emotions. We just don't always think we do. We always have that pause between like a stimulus and a response. And the more we practice doing that, because we can't just be perfect at it all the time, the better we get at feeling like we're more in control of situations, the more we understand what's going on around us. So I don't know if that's a good example, but it's one that might resonate because I think anger is something we've all experienced. And a lot of the times we automatically think it's a bad thing, but actually it's something which is fundamentally telling us something important.
Yeah, I like that. I really like the example because I agree. Many people see being angry as something that is negative or bad, and I think when you notice that you're angry, you can also dig deeper and understand what makes you angry, right? Sometimes I don't really have an idea why I feel a bit sad or a bit angry or a bit frustrated, and only later I discover what made me frustrated, right? And then you have the option to act on it. And as you pointed out, it's so difficult to find a balance between acknowledging it and expressing it, but not expressing it in a rocket fuel way that overwhelms people and insults people, maybe even. And I think that's also what most people or many people in data analytics and analytical thinkers in general struggle with. What is it's either on this side or on this side. It's either too strong or maybe totally swallowed and not expressed at all. What are your thoughts on finding, the right balance or expressing the emotion, the anger or whatever it is, in a way that is not insulting, but also still expressed if that's what you want?
Yes, that's a good question. So you can sort of take it. So we sort of take this back one step. The first thing you need to do is acknowledge the emotion is happening. I think the problems come when people become defensive. Like if I suddenly started raising my voice at you, you might be, "Hey, dude, you sound a bit angry." And because I haven't acknowledged that anger, I'm like, "No, I'm not angry." And it becomes like this messy situation of dishonesty, and that it's terrible for building trust and being candid in a productive way. So the first thing you do is, I would say, is before you even start thinking, okay, I'm going to just try something out, is you become a bit more introspective. Start labeling the emotional experiences you have. Start deciding that, as opposed to just saying that, I don't feel so good today, try and get specific about what that feeling is like for you. And you can make a note of it. There's a really good, for people that are, obviously using technology, there's a great app called the Mood Meter app. It's developed by a guy called Dr. Mark Brackett from the Yale Center of Emotion Intelligence, where it gives you a chart of different emotions, again, dependent on the level of energy and the level of pleasantness, where you can log in any time of the day and say, right now, yeah, that's the emotion I'm feeling based on how energized I am, how good I feel. Kind of make a note of that and record through the day what emotions you're experiencing. And it's kind of like having a live journal of your like emotional body clock. And if you start looking at that data, you'll start figuring out, okay, well, that time of the day I have a meeting with this particular person, or this time of the day I'm about to go for a run. And you can start seeing the kind of things that stimulate that emotion. And once you kind of make sense of that, it's actually easier to talk about those emotions because you understand yourself a little bit better. And then when you're able to communicate how you feel and say, look, I'm feeling a bit angry because of the situation, it stops it from becoming, I'm just being angry at you. And you just have to accept that. And it actually is about you, isn't it? Because I'm being angry to you right now. My voice is raised. It's about realizing that we have an ownership of our emotions if we choose to have it. But the starting point is just for us to start recognizing that emotions are happening all the time, even the ones which feel like mean no difference in the world. Like if you feel mellow, right? So maybe you finished a long day training and you want to order a pizza or whatever, that's fine, isn't it? You don't have to think about that too much. But if you just check in and realize the emotion you're experiencing and label that, increase your emotional literacy, you've added another way of describing how you feel. And if you think about when you have to have difficult conversations or you have to actually articulate yourself so people understand what you mean, the more you can draw on that kind of like experience and explain that to someone, the more you've got to offer them, the more they can understand, the less they're just seeing the kind of outputs of what you're doing. They can kind of see the inputs as well.
I like it. I really like that perspective. And I try to do that as well. If I feel really tired and I'm about to have dinner with my girlfriend, I try to tell her, right? I try to tell her, hey, let's have dinner. Just so you know, I'm very tired. Otherwise, you might be making assumptions that I'm not interested in your stories or you're talking about work. And you give them data about you, and by expressing that, they understand you better, and they will make less assumptions. They have more data about you. So I think there's a lot of value in there to discover how you feel, and then also express that to other people. And what I'm wondering now while I'm talking is, I think a lot of people see the value of understanding your own emotions and understanding what's going on because that's you, right? That's me. Um, But why should I care about the emotions of other people? Nice. What I think is that it's kind of similar, but it's mirrored, because we're all interacting with other people, right? Whether you want it or not. In your job, you do not always have a choice. In your personal life, I hope you do. You do, so I hope you behave accordingly. So you choose your friends wisely. But by understanding more about other people, you can also create better collaboration. So if I know about you that you're always, very simple example, that you're often moody in the morning, then maybe it's better to have a meeting in the afternoon instead of the morning. But of course, you can go way deeper with that. So the more data I have about you, the better I can interact with you, the more pleasant our conversations become, and the more productive they become if you're at work. Because if I know that if you are a person who's very direct and gets very annoyed when I present a lot of technical details and things you don't really care about, that you get annoyed, you get irritated, you get easily distracted. If I know that about you, if I know about your emotional state and your triggers, then I know when I do a presentation to you that I should come with a concrete story, right? Not a very long narrative with all types of technical explanations, but I need to be on point. So that's why understanding other people, collecting data about them, understanding their algorithms, then you can better interact with them and have more pleasant, more fun, and more productive interactions. That's what I think.
Well, I think that's perfect. And also, I know you talk about algorithms in your book, which of course, I'm a big fan of. And you make a really good point there, which I think sometimes people don't immediately think about when they think about other people's emotions. They kind of get caught in the idea that, we have to think about other people's emotions because we have to be nice to them, or we have to be, it's just a polite thing to do. And sure, I'm all for people being polite and nice, right? I like to live in a world where people generally like spending time with each other. And, I'd rather have, a happy environment where people want to be there. But the point is that you've made, which is so true, is that understanding other people's emotions is for our own benefit as much as anything else. It gives us, again, data to understand how we can productively interact with them for collaboration, for leadership, for just any relationship dynamic, right? It's the idea that if we think that we should just look at people's output and look at that as a logical kind of template for how they're thinking, then it's inaccurate, because they'll be thinking different things based on the emotions they're experiencing. Now, we're never going to be able to get a 100% accurate perception of someone else. Now, you can build up a really empathetic approach, right? Where you start really trying to understand what makes someone else tick and kind of relate that to your experience, but also appreciate it's distinct to them. You can guess all you like. You'll never get it accurate. If you ask them, you're going to get a better idea. But the point of trying to do that, again, helps you to understand how to be, a better version of yourself as well, and it can come down to how you can help influence someone, right? I'm not talking about the dark arts and manipulating them. I'm saying that if you want to convince someone of your argument, then just working on a logical level will only get you so far. You have to understand what emotions are driving their way of looking at the world as well. So if you're able to tune in with those, you're going to have a much better chance. We've probably both been in a situation where someone has said, just, I'm curious, are you feeling like this at the moment? And they've said how you're feeling, right? And what does that make you feel? It makes you feel like this person gets me. This person listened. I feel understood. This person is worth me spending time with. It's worth me listening to them. It's worth me doing something with this person, right? So it's actually in your benefit to take that empathetic approach if you want to get people on board. So yeah, I think how you explained it is a really good way of looking at the value that comes from wanting to deepen your understanding of other people's emotional experiences.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you. You're a coach and trainer, and I'm curious because coaches, at least good coaches, are famous for asking really good questions, right? So I'm curious, what type of coaching questions do you often use, or what have you seen that benefited the coaching?
Yeah, it's a good question. How long have we got, Gilbert? It could be. I say that, and I don't say that in an arrogant way, like I've got thousands of incredible questions, but I guess I have that geek tendency where I like collecting coaching questions. So I'll hear a question and think that's awesome. Like what a great kind of inquisitive, open question that could be. The key thing, of course, is like you can have all the great questions, but it's knowing when to use them. Because otherwise, you just feel like, look at me impressing you with my questions and aren't I smart? Which kind of takes away the whole point of the coaching, right? It's about them, not you. But if I think about the work I do, which is helping people to kind of think about their emotional intelligence and, what their emotions are telling them, what other people's emotions are telling them, then I guess my questions kind of get shaped a little bit around helping them understand those experiences. Um, so I've got a few questions. If I give you one that I think is particularly powerful and maybe a lot of people will resonate with. So to give you some context, a lot of the work I do with clients, they never have enough kind of time to do everything they want. They have competing priorities. It's almost a bit like overload, time management, like what do I do first? Well, the reality is you're never going to achieve everything that you want to do. And that's a bit of a bitter pill to swallow. You could have all the time in the world, but if you have an active mind, then there's always going to be something else you want to do. Now, the thing is, you could ask the question, so, okay, what is it you want to do? And that's a fine question. Someone could kind of expand upon it a little bit. But a question I like to ask is, if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? So if someone has said, I think about, I'm definitely going to do this. That's going to be the first thing I do. It's like, okay, great. So what are you choosing not to do by doing that? Because the thing is, we have this cognitive bias where we just think we can achieve much more than we will. So we underestimate how long things will take to do. we think that will take an hour. It's like, and normally we're still doing it the next day. And it's not always the case, and we can learn to get better at that. But the point is, we have to be saying no to something to say yes to something. So us having the call today means that I've had to say no to something. Now, what I've said no to might not be that important. It may have been that I just wanted to have a longer lunch break, right? Or something like that. I don't need to have that. But in other situations, it could be a case of like, well, both these things feel important. So which one am I going to say yes to? And the one you say yes to should matter on a motivational value level. It should be doing something that is really important to how you regard yourself, right? So it's about, if I'm doing, for instance, with this conversation right now, what is my motivational value for doing it? It's because I know that I'll come away having learned something with someone that I really enjoy spending time with. And that's kind of like important to like how I live my life. Now, if the reason that I was doing this is because I just wanted to get a podcast out there and hope that it wins a bit of business, then it would be a bit like, well, is that a good enough reason? I don't know, because it's not really why I set up my business in the first place or do my coaching. So it's just that question basically gives you a chance to recognize the fact you have to say no to something, which a lot of the time people don't. People just think they'll do that thing later. And actually, sometimes you have to make a choice on something. So that's, I don't know if that resonates with you. That's one example.
It does, it does, and it brutally resonates because it's a question I need to ask myself more often, or people need to ask my to me more often, because I'm really enthusiastic and often easily enthusiastic about new projects, new things I want to do. Also, I'm not very good at saying no to people. which makes this even more difficult. So, and I usually underestimate how much time something requires. So all that combines means that I often take up too much work, and that means either more stress or the fact that I'm not able to finish in time, or things get delayed. So I really struggle with this one, and I get much better. But if I have more focus and say no to more things, especially when taking up new projects, everything goes so much smoother. I have more focus on the projects I say yes to, and the quality of the work is so much better. So I'm really trying to improve here.
That's good. That's good. I know we've talked about this before, and it's because it's an interesting question because it does work on different levels too. It makes people stop and realize that, are they saying yes for other people as opposed to saying yes for themselves? And it's okay to say yes to other people, right? And I think that kind of altruistic nature that people have, that supportive nature, is kind of what makes business social groups tick. But if we start doing it at the expense of something that matters to us, then it doesn't actually help us in the long run. I think, yeah, and I should shout out the fact that this is a question from a book called The Coaching Habit by a guy called Michael Bungay Steiner, which is a great read for anyone that's kind of interested in the kind of questions that might not be the most obvious ones, but the ones that might just shift the way you think about something. Because there's no right or wrong answer a lot of the times. It's more about just presenting you with an opportunity as a coachee, as a client, to think about something a bit differently and to invest some time in how you really feel about something.
Yeah, I love that book. It's a really small book. You can finish it in an evening, maybe even, and it's a set of questions with context, and it's very helpful if you lead a team, or if you're trying to help people grow. But even in a regular setting, in a conversation or a meeting at work, it's so helpful to have those questions ready and see where you can use them. I really like the book. I posted on LinkedIn as well on it.
Yeah, it's a great, and I think you mentioned there as well, if you're a leader, if you're a data leader or whatever, and you're working with one of your team members, either through, formal kind of like review meetings or just informal conversations, then you can ask that question, especially if you see someone that's maybe starting a project before they finish something else, just as a way of helping them to realign what their priorities are as well. And just without being directed and saying, you need to do this because of that, it's getting them to recognize, actually, how important is this right now? So I think that's one of the questions that I think, and again, these are questions you can ask other people, right? If you want to build trust, you build rapport, have, below the surface conversations, you can do that. So I think that's a good one for kind of introspection and self-awareness. I think a good question for kind of the other kind of side of emotional intelligence, which is more about social awareness and relationship management, is, so put it this way. So I would say 90% of the coaching conversations I have with people, the coachee or the client is complaining about someone else, right? And there's no judgment from me here, because we all have the right to get frustrated and to vent, but that doesn't always work. It feels good at the time, but it doesn't really change things. It's kind of like, it's a bit kind of self-indulgent. And we end up thinking that basically a lot of people think that, well, if it wasn't for that person, things would be fine. Or that person is just specifically out to get me. And that's kind of irrational thinking, but our brains like that narrative because it takes away accountability from us. So one of the questions I like to ask people of that is, and again, so this is inspired by Brené Brown, that I know you'll be familiar with, is when someone is annoying you, and you can choose a more fruity word, if you like, for annoying, is to say, okay, what is the most generous assumption I can make about their behavior right now? Because you talked a little bit about assumptions. And basically the idea behind that is, almost all the time, people are doing the best they can given the circumstances they find themselves in. Yes, you can say there's rogue examples where people are toxic, malicious, nasty people, but if we're honest, 90% of us in our day-to-day lives every time we feel that someone's annoying us, that person isn't there to make our lives hell. They haven't got enough time to make our lives hell for a start, but we're perceiving it as that. But by asking that question, we start taking that empathetic approach and thinking, well, what are they trying to achieve here? Or like, what is their reasoning for doing that beyond just trying to annoy me? Because it doesn't really make sense that they would just want to annoy me. Surely they want me to not be annoyed. And it just starts us thinking about that person may be coming from a different place, but what is that place? And actually, if we understand that place, firstly, we'll have a better relationship with them. And secondly, we'll switch the narrative, right? We'll calm our own thinking will become a little bit more pragmatic and realistic and actually less kind of blamey on other people. So I think it's always a good one. And it's one that kind of people have to have a kind of a bit of a big swallow to, because when you first say it, they don't really want to acknowledge it. They'd much rather say, well, it's the other person that has to change.
Exactly. It's a really cool question. I've never heard this question specifically. I did read about different frameworks that have the same underlying mechanism, but I really like it, but because I also don't think it's naive to approach it this way, because many times people are just trying their best, right? But they're in their own world. They're late for a certain reason you don't know about. They were a bit rude, maybe because they had their reasons. And it doesn't mean you need to accept everything. You can draw boundaries, clear boundaries, and have a conversation with them about what they did, but approaching it from a more empathetic perspective, asking yourselves about the most generous assumption. It removes the bias of you putting all the blame on the other person. So I think it's a very, very powerful question.
Yeah, it's one that I agree with what you said. It's one that I think, and we've talked about this before as a coach. What is your role? Is your role to just shift people's thinking because you think that that's right, or is it about helping them just to see a different perspective? Now, arguably different coaches will give you a different answer, but to me, where my work comes in, it's about, even if that's a subtle shift in perspective, it's often those subtle shifts that make the biggest difference, because people then use that to come and suddenly build out their own conclusions. You're moving away from kind of like telling them that's, you're not telling them not to do something. You're telling them just to re-look at how they're seeing something. And then their mind will start creating a slightly different narrative. And I think that's what you're trying to do. You're not doing it for your sake. You're doing it to present them with more options to view a situation. A lot of the time, I think as well, people, if they're not, I'm not saying everyone does this, because not every session is people like moaning, but people feel maybe that it comes from a lack of control, right? Because we can't control other people's thoughts. We can't control their behavior. We can maybe influence it, but really what we can do is control our own, and we can control our responses to that. So anything we can do that feels like it gives us more options, it gives us a bit more control. And that fundamentally feels good. That fundamentally feels empowering. And I think as leaders or as teammates, we should be wanting to make the people around us feel like they have options, they have different perspectives, they feel like, in a non-judgmental way, they can say how they feel about something, but also be open-minded about, different opinions, different kind of experiences. So I guess part of the work is to try and create that kind of culture within teams. And I'm sure I know that's the kind of work you're doing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this perspective, this approach is not only helpful for coaches or even data leaders, but by asking more questions and letting other people think and see it in their world, it's way more lasting as well, because you can tell people, no, this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to do. But that's not really coaching or helping in many cases, because you don't know everything about their situation and you're trying to force your perspective on other people. And by asking questions, you let them be behind the steering wheel while you guide them and give them pointers to suggestions to look at and to consider. And only if they really want to adopt it, they will adopt it. But then the behavior might change forever, right? Instead of just those 5 minutes.
It's so true. And it's made me think about, again, something that when you think as a leader as well, and maybe a data leader, it can kind of cross over into different functions. And you think about, again, you're looking at your team and maybe looking at the way they communicate and stuff. I think sometimes it's easy for us to be quite like black and white with our thinking. We just see the outputs. We just see the sort of the expressed behavior. We don't see what's driving that behavior so much. So, for example, maybe this will be familiar to you or listeners. You can kind of work with people. You know, you may have someone in your team that is really loud, right? They just don't stop talking, and you can think, well, they must think their opinion is more important than everyone else's. They must think they know best. And we make that assumption. But actually, maybe what's happening is they come from an environment where the only way for them to be heard was to speak up and to keep speaking up, because no one was going to ask their opinion. No one was going to give them the time. And that habit had just now become this kind of like overdone behavior that they use. And at the same time, we could have someone that's really quiet and never says anything in a meeting. And more you might be thinking, well, they're not interested. Why are they not saying anything? And it could be that that person, again, the input of that is that they're scared of speaking up. They're scared of saying something because, again, their narrative, past experiences has told them that it's better to stay quiet and wait till I have more information to make a decision. Now, you can look at it and just say that, well, both behaviors need working on. But until you have that one-on-one conversation, until you choose to kind of share that with someone, but in a non-judgmental way, you're never going to change that fundamental behavior, because you're never going to allow someone to see the impact of their behavior, because you'll either be shooting it down, which will just make them feel defensive about it, or you're going to be just, not acknowledging that there's an issue there. So I don't know whether it's something that I think is really important in terms of helping build communication skills within team is about having a really strong feedback culture and being able to speak transparently and candidly, and about thinking about not the person, but the behavior, and being able to share when you're giving feedback, the behavior rather than make it about the person. There's something in your book that really inspired me. I'm going to put you on the spot here, so no pressure, but you something called the keep, start, stop method, right?
That's right.
Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So what I mentioned in my book is a feedback method that I find very useful. It's the keep, start, stop method. So you ask people 3 questions in your surrounding. So it might be a personal life or at work or your manager, your peers, whoever. We ask them 3 questions. What should I start doing? So what am I not doing now that I should be doing, according to you? And what should I keep doing? Something that is appreciated by the other person. What should I keep doing? And third one, what should I stop doing? So maybe there's a certain behavior that annoys people, or they see that it doesn't lead to the results that they're after. So those 3 questions are pretty specific, but it helps people to channel their feedback in a very productive way. So I found that these 3 questions, start, keep, stop, are very effective in getting feedback that is useful and also implementable.
Yeah, I think it's so reading about that had a massive impact on the way that I both ask and give feedback as well, those 3 questions. And I guess from a kind of emotional intelligence context as well, kind of my thinking around that method is that what you're basically doing is letting someone see how their behavioral strengths play out in reality. And you're giving them that external self-awareness as well, so they can see what's really going on, but not in a way which is like so acute that it's just sort of like, it feels like it's just kind of like criticism, or it feels like it's just like praise. It's actually getting them to start seeing how their behaviors play out. So when you're telling someone you should keep doing this, you're basically saying these behavioral strengths you've got work really well and they get results. So you should keep doing that, right? you should start doing this means that you've probably got some untapped potential that you're not using here. But I can see it, other people can see it, and it'll be in your interest to start using maybe a strength you have got, but you just don't use it very often because you lack a bit of confidence. So give it a try. Try it out. Know it's a safe environment because that's been encouraged. And the stop is interesting as well, because often what people should stop doing is overdoing a strength. So to give you an example of that, this kind of comes from sort of positive psychology theory and something called relationship awareness theory as well. Not that you don't, not expecting your listeners to geek out on that, but it's the idea that a lot of the things we want people to stop doing are things that people are doing because they think it's getting them the result they want. They can't see the fact it's just being used in the wrong context. It's like if you try and, you need the right tool for the right job, right? If I was going to go and repair my roof right now, and that I've done up the house, didn't do the roof actually, then it's not much good me going out there with a screwdriver, right? That's not gonna help. But maybe because I really like using my screwdriver, I'm going to try and do that job with it because I'm so used to it. But actually, I've kind of got into this habit with it. So, for instance, I know a lot of people that are really helpful. I'm surrounded by people both in terms of my personal life and professional life that will do things to really kind of like be available to offer input and to give a guiding hand. And that's great. In the right context, there's nothing better than having help and support. But the thing is, if someone is trying to help too much, it can kind of look a bit different. It can look a bit like that person is trying to take over. It can look a bit like that person doesn't trust your ability to do it. So it could be the fact that someone should stop being so helpful because they're making someone else feel like they can't get a job done. So the strength is coming from a good place. Their probably intention is that helping people makes them feel good. They feel validation. And when it works really well. But they're so used to it, they just keep doing it. It's like when someone's really methodical. Keep doing that when, it works well in these situations. But when we've got like a deadline and actually we don't have to get this perfect, we just need to get something out like a proposal or we need to make a decision, then being really methodical is not going to work because by the time you've gone through it all, the deadline's passed and it's pointless. So stop. It's kind of saying what you should stop doing, but acknowledging the fact that I understand why you're doing it. That becomes powerful as feedback because then people are a bit like, okay, you're not just telling me to stop and I don't understand why. It's like, oh, there is a reason why I'm doing that. It comes from a good place, but it's not working. You're giving someone the gift. People talk about the gift of feedback, but it's more about the gift of external self-awareness. People start understanding how their behavior plays out and how people see them. And when you start using the stop method, bit of a tongue twister for me, and you ask people that, and I do it too. What should I use it as my feedback when I do coaching. I ask people, what should I keep doing, start doing, stop doing? It gives me way more than just if I was to ask a whole bunch of like questions about specific stuff. It makes people actually think about what I'm bringing to the table. So yeah, man, I love it basically. So that's hopefully that's interesting to hear how I use it. Yeah, yeah, and and I think sometimes I try and it's something where it's not this idea that we should always think we have to everyone is super nice or like we have to kind of lead with this idea that um you know always giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying that if we see toxic behavior in the workplace or if there's bullying or anything like that, you have to call that out. The issue is when it's not that, it's just that your brain is running to a conclusion that, oh, this person is being unfair, or this person is, you know, doing things and I can't understand why, so I'm just going to assume it's a bad thing because it doesn't work for my brain. It doesn't really help us because it doesn't really give us much chance to, like, develop them, especially if we're leading them as a manager or something like
Hmm.
that. Um, so yeah, I think feedback is such an important thing for anyone that wants to cultivate their self-awareness, because it improves, if you start getting comfortable giving people feedback, that's a great skill to have, because a lot of managers I work with get scared about giving feedback. So finding the right way of doing that is important. And receiving it is so important because it allows you to see accurately how you come across to other people, and not kind of live in a sort of maybe a past fantasy about what your behavior is, because our behavior is constantly evolving. So checking in with it is important. And the best way for a non-biased check-in is to get someone else to do it with us, and to allow someone to feel comfortable about doing it with us as well.
Awesome, man. Thank you for sharing all those insights. And right now we're nearing the end of this conversation. So I'm curious, what is one big takeaway you want listeners to take away from this episode?
Okay, so hopefully just the realization that maybe emotions are something that are worthy of us to treat as data, something that isn't just things we have to see and think, oh, that's an emotion experience. No, no, no. Everything's an emotion experience. And when you start thinking like that and you start diving a bit more into it, you'll learn a lot about yourself and other people. I guess a takeaway that, a quick pragmatic takeaway that might be helpful for people that are thinking, okay, so I kind of understand how I get to understand myself better. But how do I really get to understand someone else better without explicitly asking them the whole time, right? Um, and the way I think you can do that is start reframing small talk. How much time do we spend having kind of conversations which are polite and kind of like, all right, but don't really tell us anything. So if it's, I think I've told you about this before, but if you're wondering about someone, you want to get to know them a bit better, instead of asking them, how was your weekend? Especially on a Monday, it's a Monday, right? Ask them, what was the highlight of your weekend? Because just by changing that word, you're getting them to have to share something specific. They have to, instead of saying, oh, it was good, thanks, it was all right, they have to say, oh, actually, yeah, it was this. It was making Sunday dinner with my wife. And you can think, unless it's something so bizarre you can't relate to it, you can be like, oh, okay, that's cool. And you can then maybe say, oh, was it because you really like cooking? And they could be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Or they could be like, not really. It's just because I get to spend that time, that precious time with my wife. It's the sharing of the occasion. The more you start asking questions, reframing small talk, the more you start learning what drives people. Because then, if I know why you enjoy having your Sunday roast with your wife, the reason why, I probably also can start learning why you like certain parts of your job, why you like going to do like a Wim Hof cold shower, because the driving motivation will still be the same. You'll have the same reasoning for doing it, but you'll never find out if you don't start asking questions that just dig a little bit deeper. So I would say try, just because I hear it so often, how was your weekend? I think it's such a boring question. Ask what was the highlight, because you'll find something out, and that something could really help you learn about that person in a deeper level and understand what drives their experience.
Yeah, what was the highlight of your weekend? It's a question I learned from you actually a few months back, and I started asking it, and it really works because it pulls people out of autopilot, and they really need to think and reflect on what they have done and what was meaningful to them. And by digging deeper, you discover all these drivers and motivations that is so helpful, and such helpful data to also understand them in other situations. So thank you for this sharing this tip. Um, yeah, lastly, I want to ask you, because you're doing really great work with Equip and helping so many people, discover themselves and understanding themselves, become more effective and more happy in their jobs. So where can people follow your work and connect with you or follow you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad you think that, and I'm, likewise with you. And so, I guess LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a pretty unique surname, Tom Zierold. I guess we both have quite unique names. You're going to find this pretty easy on LinkedIn. I normally post quite a lot of content, be it articles, videos, or just sharing material, which I think kind of brings to light the importance and the kind of pragmatic nature of emotional intelligence, why it is something that we can all benefit from strengthening. For those that have Instagram, you can follow my handle. It's equip_CT. And then my website is www.equip_CT.com. Hopefully across those channels, there's going to be stuff that resonates with people. I always like to hear from people as well. So if anyone has a question, anyone just wants to have a conversation, reach out. I think the most important thing that I've ever learned is always be looking to build your network, always maintain strong relationships, because it's those relationships that in the future will lead to opportunities. There's a saying, it's like, it's not what you know, it's not who, it's who you know. Well, I think it's important to know something, but I think if you don't know people, then that something may never actually become anything, because you don't have a chance to really discuss it or to explore it with someone else. So love to hear from people, love speaking. So yeah, man.
Awesome. Yeah, that's also how we met, right? So valuable things can be built and can arise from networking and connecting with other people, with strangers on the internet.
Exactly. One may continue.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for your time today, for spreading your insights about emotional intelligence, about seeing questions in a different light, and how to use them in conversations, how to use emotions as data, and how to discover more about yourself, about other people. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners have as well. So thanks a lot for your time, and I hope to speak with you soon.
Thanks, Gilbert. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope your listeners are able to take something away from it. And yeah, really, really pleased and privileged to be part of this podcast series. So I know it's going to be a great success. So yeah, great to be involved.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tom. Speak soon. Bye-bye. Do you want people to listen to your data and increase your business impact? Then take my free email course or do the quick self-test of your data communication skills. Go to mindspeaking.com and start learning today.